Hi guys, today we're going to be talking about my favorite book romances. Just to clarify, this isn't just books in the romance genre. These are like my favorite couples from every book I've ever read. I do like, epic world building fantasies or books with sort of broader themes, but I do like a good romance and I like a couple that I can root for. So we're gonna be talking about those today. I'm gonna start with a classic because it's one of my favorite romances of all time. I read this in high school and I was just so taken with this couple, and it is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, specifically Jane and Mr. Rochester. This was really the first sort of like chick lit classic that I ever read, and I don't know, I love Jane so much as a character on her own. I like that she doesn't just settle, her relationship with Rochester evolves on her own terms, which is really different than a lot of the other literature that came out around the same time as this. Jane has a lot of agency considering that she's a governess, and Mr. Rochester respects that for the most part. They do obviously have their ups and downs, but they overcome it, and Mr. Rochester is just, I think he's part of why I love like a really good grumpy love interest. I don't know. He's a little harsh around the edges, but he's still soft on the inside, and he becomes really vulnerable with his feelings for Jane, and I love their relationship. It's obviously not perfect, but it's very romantic. There's particularly a passage in here where he talks about how he feels like he has this red string that ties his heart to hers, and whenever she's far away, he feels it tugging, and I don't know, my 15-year-old self was like, it was just, I don't know, it's so good. I love this story. It's one of my favorite classics ever. I really love the movie with Michael Fassbender playing Mr. Rochester. I thought he was really good in that role, and Mia, I can never remember her last name, but that adaptation was really good. So yeah, this is top tier romance for me in literature. I do want to give a special shout out to one book that people probably expect to be on this list, but it's only an honorary mention because I actually haven't read it. I've only seen the movie, and that is Pride and Prejudice, Lizzie and Mr. Darcy. I do want to read this book. It is on my TBR. It's been on my shelf for years. This is literally like my best friend's favorite book, and she's read Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. She's watched like all the adaptations. She was actually the one that showed me the movie with Keira Knightley back in the day too. So that movie is like one of my comfort movies. I love it so much. It's so romantic. Everything about it is just amazing. And I do really like the couple. Again, I just haven't read this one yet, so I do want to actually read it before I officially put it on my favorite book couples list, but it's got an honorary place waiting for it. I just have to actually read it first. So I actually don't have the original series for this next couple. I have the sequel series, and that is Percy and Annabeth from the Percy Jackson and the Olympian series. This is Son of Neptune from the Heroes of Olympus series. So they're a bit older in this one, but Son of Neptune is about Percy, so I figured this would be a good stand-in. I do want to buy the actual original trilogy at some point, but I'm looking for the original hardcovers, and those are kind of hard to find now because they've reprinted them. But I love Percy and Annabeth. Their friends to lovers sort of journey over the first 5 books in the original series was just so fun, and especially I think I started those books in like middle school, and I really grew with them. I carried them with me into high school. I've reread them several times. The Heroes of Olympus series, I believe, started to come out when I was either in late high school or college. So I don't know, I feel like I grew up with Percy and Annabeth, and they make such a good couple. Their strengths and weaknesses complement each other. I love how much Percy respects the hell out of Annabeth. He defers to her judgment in a lot of cases. She's just so intelligent, and they're both really good leaders. But they just make such a power couple. I love them. And I really do want to give a reread of this again. It has been a while. And I actually don't think I ever finished the Heroes of Olympus series. I do have them all now. I just hunted them all down. But I want to start with Percy Jackson again, especially where Disney is going to be coming out with a show adaptation of it. I want to give it another reread before I start watching the show whenever that's supposed to come out. But yeah, Percy, Annabeth, top tier couple. I love them so much. And while we're on the subject of Greek mythology, I want to give a mention to a webcomic that I actually just recently started to read, but it is very popular and it's been around for a couple of years now, but that is Hades and Persephone from the webcomic Lore Olympus. And I literally started this like last week, but I quickly became obsessed. I really always loved the Hades-Persephone dynamic. I really love the original myth. There's a couple of books that I own that I've picked up because they have that kind of dynamic, specifically Deal with the Elf King by Elise Kova. And my timing for picking up this series was actually really good because literally just a couple days ago, they announced that the first 25 chapters are going to be published in a volume physically. So I'm really excited. I've already read it, obviously, but I'm definitely going to buy that as soon as it comes out. I love Hades and Persephone in that series. I really like how the author kind of holds true to the original myth, but gives it like a fresh spin. It makes it really modern, and a lot of the issues with the Hades-Persephone dynamic are a little bit more forgivable because of that. I did sort of not enjoy quite so much in the beginning how naive Persephone was, but I think she's really grown as a character throughout the series. And I really love Hades is like, he's very vulnerable with his feelings, much more so than either of his brothers in the comic and stuff. And he's very open about his feelings with Persephone as well. And I just think they make a really good couple. He's not like super macho typically. And yeah, I don't know. I love the sort of the dynamic between sort of her powers of life and his powers over death. And it's such a fun, interesting relationship. So that one is a new obsession of mine. Once again, throwing it back to a book that I read in high school, but I have carried with me for so long because I love this book. I'd be surprised if like a lot of people know this one. It's not a super popular book, but I love it so much. That is the Botticelli Secret by Marina Fiorato. This is a story that takes place during the Italian Renaissance. It was before Italy was like a nation. It was a conglomerate of city-states, but this story follows a young woman named Luciana, and at the beginning of the story, she's a prostitute, but she poses for Sandro Botticelli's painting La Primavera. She poses as the goddess Flora in this giant painting, and this painting kind of has like Da Vinci Code vibes where like there's secret meanings to all the figures and stuff, and there's like a conspiracy story happening. It is such a fun historical fiction novel, especially if you really like art. So definitely pick that up if you like it. But the central romance in the story is between Luciana and a monk named Guido, and they have a really fun sort of dynamic back and forth because, again, she's a prostitute. She's very vulgar and says what's on her mind. And Guido is a monk and is just the total opposite. And he's very uncomfortable with just how brash and gross she can be. And she likes pushing his buttons. And as they're solving this mystery together, they end up kind of like on the run. And the bond that they form is just... it's so fun, and it's a really good like slow burn romance too if you like those, because again, Guido's a monk. He starts to develop feelings for Luciana, but is really torn between those feelings and his devotion to the church and to celibacy. So this is a really fun historical fiction romance book. It's one of my favorites of all time, and again, Luciana and Guido, I've loved them since I was a teenager, and I reread this every now and then, and I'm always just so surprised how good it is because it's such a hidden gem. I never hear anybody talking about this book, but it is fabulous. Next up, I have a couple books that actually fall under the romance category, and they're both more recent releases. So first up, I have Beach Read by Emily Henry. I read this last year, I want to say in like September, maybe August. I loved this book. It goes so much further than like what I expect a typical romance to be. There's a lot of emotional depth in it, and it just hit me in the face. It was a lot. It was really good. So this one will always hold a special place in my heart, and I really love the relationship between the main character, January, and her sort of rival turned lover, Gus. Their whole history where they went to college together, and he's like a really serious writer who writes really like you know, the great American novel kind of thing, and she writes romance that he doesn't take very seriously sets them off at odds with each other. And again, he's sort of the grumpy love interest with a heart of gold that I love. I don't know, I love seeing the evolution of a really like tough exterior to a really like soft heart, and their relationship was really fun. There's definitely like some drama and angst and stuff in this as well, and honestly, actually my favorite part about this story probably isn't even about the central couple, but I do really love the central couple in this book, and it's one of my favorite romances that I've read in a really long time. Along the same vein, we have Well Met by Jen DeLuca. We have sort of like a fun main character, Emily, and a grumpy love interest named Simon. And this place takes place during a Renaissance fair, and Simon runs the Renaissance fair every year, and he's really serious about, like, he takes it very, very seriously, even though it's a very kind of small time Renaissance festival. And Emily's new in town, and they sort of get off on the wrong foot because he doesn't think she's taking it as seriously as she should. Their relationship really evolves over the course of the summer. Simon dresses up as a pirate character who's really fun and flirtatious, and Emily's very intrigued by sort of the difference in his regular personality versus his pirate personality, and is his flirting with her real or is it just an act? And it's so fun. This book, I smiled the entire time reading it. It was just so sweet and goofy and fun. And again, you have like this grump love interest who over the course of the book really softens into a sweet little cinnamon roll, and it's just so charming. So highly recommend this romance. It's so cute. It's one of my favorites. Getting into more fantasy books with a romantic subplot, we have The Bear and the Nightingale by Catherine Arden. This one actually, the romance doesn't actually take place more until the second one, Girl in the Tower, but I think The Bear and the Nightingale is probably the more recognizable of the two, so that's why I'm holding this one up. But the romance between Vasya and the god of winter, Winter King, Morozko, is so good. Again, it's very much like a slow burn thing because he's sort of this ancient being, and you watch her grow up from a child to a teenager, and he seeks out her power in order to help sustain his life, basically. It's really rooted in Russian folklore, and I don't have like a whole lot of background knowledge on that, but it was such a good read. I really enjoy a good like god among men kind of vibe, and Morozko does that really well. He's sort of like a fading god because the old ways are dying and Catholicism is really starting to take over. So he's really bonded to Vasya because her believing in him is sort of what gives him power. But that dynamic really starts to shift as the series progresses, and they do form sort of a more genuine bond that isn't like quite as uneven in their agency and power and stuff. And they just have like a really tender, cool relationship. I really enjoyed it, and I was rooting for them the entire time. The second one, again, is more sort of where this romantic interaction takes place, and then later the third one. But the foundation of it really starts in Bear and the Nightingale, and I enjoyed this whole series, but I love Morozko. Next up, we have a book that I think is so underrated. It only just came out in the last year, and I believe it was actually a Fairy Loot pick sometime last summer, but I never hear anybody talking about it. Maybe because it's a standalone, I don't know. But that is Girl Serpentthorne by Melissa Bashardoust. This book is so good. It's based off of Persian mythology and folklore and fairy tales, which is something I've never read before in a fantasy book. I thought it was so interesting. And then at the center of it all, you have a bisexual protagonist in sort of a love triangle with a man and a woman demon thing. And it was just so fun. I don't know. Typically, I'm not like the biggest fan of love triangles, but I thought like sort of the push and pull between all three characters was done really well. And I really loved the main character, Soraya. She was really cool. She basically is cursed that like she can't be touched, so she has kind of been starved of physical affection her entire life. So now as she's faced with like these two love interests, it's a little overwhelming for her. But she especially has to kind of learn how to unpack her feelings, especially towards this other woman, Parvana. It was so good. Again, kind of a slow burn, enemies to lovers sort of situation. really rooted in Persian mythology. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, definitely pick this up, because again, I feel like nobody talks about this book. I've seen people unbox the Fairy Loot, but then like never read it. So please read it. It's really good. Following up with another pretty recent release, that is The House in the Cerulean Sea. This was like my favorite book of 2020. It was, like I've said before, it was like a warm hug. I just absolutely melted reading this. The romance in this book does not take like center stage by any means, but it's like very slowly developing over the course of the novel, and it has a really good payoff in the end. The main character, Linus, is like a caseworker for magical children, and he goes around to all these orphanages to make sure that they're safe and that they're not a harm to society or to themselves. And he ends up assigned to this one orphanage in this house on the Cerulean Sea, and he ends up forming a bond with all the children, which again, that's more of like the center story, is this found family element, but he also forms this really strong connection with the caretaker of the house, Arthur. And seeing Linus's walls kind of come down around Arthur and the children was just such a touching journey. They really brought out the best in each other, and again, it was very like in the background, but it was so touching. I loved them so much. I want to read a million stories about this little family they formed. This one is just like the cutest little romance ever. Last up is a recent read for me. It came out a couple years ago, but I only sort of just hopped on the wagon. But that is Cardan and Jude from the Cruel Prince Folk of the Air series. Again, I'm pretty late to the game on this one, but I loved Cardan and Jude so much. It was like the perfect sort of enemies to lovers, misunderstanding, got off on the wrong foot sort of situation. And I just loved the development of their relationship. Jude is so badass, takes no shit type of person, and I love that. And Cardan initially starts off like very guarded and mean, but as his relationship with Jude grows stronger and they're forced to work together, he becomes very vulnerable towards her, and he's sort of like the type of person that's like, I hate everyone but you. And they're like that with each other, which is a really fun dynamic. They make a really great team, and Cardan grows so much throughout this series because of Jude. He goes from being like this spiteful child to this really loving partner to Jude, and it was just so fun to watch their relationship grow. They're like one of my new favorite couples. I saved this one for last because this might be one of my favorites from the entire list. They're just such a fun couple, and I will pretty much read anything Holly Black puts out about them because I'm obsessed. All right, and that wraps up my favorite romances, my favorite couples from books that I've ever read. Full disclosure, there's a bunch of books I have not read, obviously. I've never read any Sarah J. Maas, and I know she's sort of like the queen of fantasy romance right now. I'm looking to get into her, but I haven't yet, so I don't have any opinions on her stuff, and a million other books I haven't read. So if I'm missing anything, or if you guys have any recommendations for books with romances that you think I'll like, definitely leave them down in the comments. I am always adding to my TBR. And again, I love a good relationship. I love a good romantic journey. So thank you guys so much for watching. Please feel free to like and subscribe, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day. Thank you guys so much. Bye.